The black man stumbling into St. Avery's ER looked poor, exhausted, and seconds away from collapsing. So they judged him, they mocked him, and they decided his life could wait. But one nurse saw the truth in his eyes and risked everything to warn him, because what that hospital didn't know was that the homeless man they were leaving to die was the billionaire who had the power to bury them all by morning. And once he learned what they had done, no one in that building was ready for what came next. Marcus Reed had spent 20 years building a fortune that made politicians return his calls and CEOs choose their words carefully. He was a black billionaire in his early 50s, sharp-minded, controlled, and respected in public for the calm authority that seemed to follow him into every room. But that night, standing alone in his penthouse study overlooking downtown Atlanta, Marcus did not look powerful. He looked haunted. The envelope on his desk had no name, no return address, and no fingerprints that his security team could trace. Inside was a flash drive and a single printed sentence: "If you fund them, you own what they do." Marcus inserted the drive into his laptop. The video was shaky, likely recorded on a phone from across a waiting room. A black man in a faded hoodie was doubled over in pain near the emergency entrance of St. Avery Medical Center. Two security guards dragged him across the tile floor, while a receptionist turned her face away. No one rushed forward, no doctor intervened. The man's shoes scraped helplessly against the ground, as if he were trying to stop himself from being erased. Marcus froze. St. Avery was one of the flagship hospitals supported by the Reed Foundation, the healthcare investment arm he had created to expand emergency care in underserved black neighborhoods. He had poured millions into it: new trauma equipment, community clinics, training grants, public promises, and still this. He replayed the video 3 times. Each time his jaw tightened harder. Then his mind dragged him somewhere he hated to go. Southside Chicago, winter. His mother coughing in the back seat of a borrowed car. The emergency entrance glowing white in the dark. A nurse at the desk asking about insurance before asking her name. Marcus had been 14, skinny, angry, and powerless. By the time anyone took her seriously, it was too late. He never forgot the sound of her breathing or the silence that came after it. A soft knock broke the memory. Vanessa Cole stepped into the room. She was Marcus's chief of staff, elegant, disciplined, and almost impossible to rattle. A former federal attorney in her 40s, Vanessa had spent 8 years helping Marcus protect his empire from corruption, lawsuits, and people with polished smiles and rotten intentions. "You've been in here for an hour," she said gently. "What happened?" Marcus turned the laptop toward her. She watched the video without speaking. When it ended, her expression changed. Not shock, but recognition. As if she had long suspected something ugly was hiding behind polished hospital walls. "I want a full internal review," she said. "No," Marcus replied. Vanessa looked at him. "Then what are you thinking?" He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed an old canvas jacket, worn at the cuffs and frayed at the seams. "I'm going myself." Across the city, Naomi Carter sat in the dim hospital break room staring at her phone. She was a black night shift nurse in her early 30s, strong, observant, and exhausted in the way that came from carrying too many people at once. On the screen was a missed call from the county jail and a message from her younger brother, Malik Carter, a 19-year-old community college student now facing theft charges he swore he didn't commit. Whew, Naomi closed her eyes. She believed him, because boys like Malik, young, black, from the wrong side of the zip code, did not have to be guilty to be treated like they were. Back in his study, Marcus picked up the envelope one last time, then slipped it into his coat pocket. By midnight, he had made his decision. He would not arrive at St. Avery as a donor, a board member, or a billionaire. He would arrive as the kind of black man America ignored first and blamed fastest, and he would see exactly who they became when they thought no one important was watching. By the time Marcus Reed reached St. Avery Medical Center, the city had gone slick and silver under a thin layer of midnight rain. He stood for a moment beneath the fluorescent glow of the emergency entrance, shoulders hunched inside the frayed canvas jacket he had pulled from the back of his closet. Dirt darkened the lines of his hands. His beard had been thickened with makeup shadow, and his clothes carried the stale, sour smell of someone the world had stopped noticing. Then he pressed one hand hard against his chest, forced his breathing into shallow bursts, and stumbled through the sliding glass doors like a man trying not to collapse before anyone could help him. The waiting area fell quiet for half a second, not from concern, but from discomfort. A blonde receptionist named Kelsey Moore, a young woman with polished nails, perfect posture, and the cold efficiency of someone who had learned to sort human beings by appearance in under 3 seconds, looked up from her screen and frowned before Marcus even reached the desk. "Sir, you can't loiter in here," she said sharply. Marcus leaned against the counter and rasped, "Chest pain. Can't breathe right." Kelsey's eyes narrowed, not with alarm, but with suspicion. Instead of calling for a nurse, she glanced toward the security station as though she were deciding how fast she wanted him removed. That was when Ethan Calloway appeared. Ethan, the night operations manager, was a tall white man in his late 40s with a pressed tie, controlled smile, and the oily confidence of someone used to humiliating people without ever raising his voice. He carried authority like a private weapon. One look at Marcus was enough for him to decide the story before hearing a word. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he had already judged Marcus to be a problem, not a patient. Marcus repeated that he was having chest pain and trouble breathing. Ethan looked him up and down, eyes pausing on the torn sleeves, the worn shoes, the dark skin, the unshaven face. "We'll get to you," he said flatly. "Have a seat." Marcus was sent not to the active triage area, but to the far corner of the waiting room near a flickering television, a broken vending machine, and a restroom door that wouldn't fully close. The plastic chair wobbled beneath him. From there, he watched what happened next with painful clarity. A white man in golf clothes walked in holding his wrist and was taken back within minutes. Then a young white woman, complaining of dizziness, was escorted past the secured doors after a brief sympathetic exchange. Marcus remained where he was, ignored, watched, and quietly classified as someone whose suffering could wait. He kept one hand over his chest and lowered his gaze, but behind the performance, every detail went into memory. Across the room, Naomi Carter saw all of it. Naomi, a black nurse in her early 30s with observant eyes and the exhausted strength of someone who had learned to survive while staying useful to everyone around her, stood frozen beside a medication cart. She knew exactly what Ethan was doing. She had seen him soften his voice for wealthy donors, bark at uninsured patients, and turn cold whenever a black man in worn clothes came through those doors. She wanted to step forward, wanted to say the words "chest pain" should have triggered automatically. But Ethan had been watching her for weeks, documenting tiny mistakes, circling her like a man waiting for an excuse. Before she could move, an older janitor pushing a mop bucket passed near her elbow. Mrs. Bernice Holloway, a gray-haired black woman in her 60s with tired knees, sharp instincts, and a voice that always sounded like truth wrapped in gravel, leaned close and murmured, "Don't look surprised, baby. This happens almost every week." Naomi tried to focus on her rounds, but her phone vibrated in her scrub pocket. She slipped into the supply alcove and answered in a whisper. Malik Carter, her 19-year-old brother, sounded small and furious on the other end of the line. He was calling from the holding cell again. "Naomi, the public defender didn't even let me explain," he said. "He just told me to take a deal because juries don't trust boys like me." Naomi closed her eyes. Malik had been accused of stealing from a convenience store in a neighborhood where he had already been judged guilty by the time the police arrived. Now, hearing the fear in his voice while watching another black man be dismissed in plain sight, Naomi felt the same bitter pattern tightening around both of them. One in a jail cell, one in an ER chair, both waiting for someone to decide they mattered. When she stepped back into the waiting area, Marcus was still in that corner seat, head lowered, breathing hard enough to look convincing, invisible enough to be forgotten. Ethan stood at the nurse's station, laughing quietly with Kelsey, as if nothing urgent had entered the building at all. Naomi said nothing. Marcus said nothing. The room moved around them in practiced indifference, and under the hum of fluorescent lights, St. Avery became exactly what its walls had been pretending not to be. A place where silence did not happen by accident, but by design. Nearly 40 minutes after being pushed into the worst corner of the waiting room, Marcus was finally called for a basic check that felt more like a formality than an attempt to help him. A tired-looking triage tech clipped a pulse monitor to his finger, asked him 3 rushed questions, and led him into a narrow exam bay separated by curtains that did little to hide the noise of the ER. Marcus kept his shoulders slumped and his breathing uneven. but his eyes missed nothing. A portable EKG was done in less than 2 minutes. No one explained the results. No doctor asked about his medical history in detail. The whole process felt designed to create paperwork, not care. Hidden in the lining of his old coat was a micro recorder, no bigger than a shirt button. And while Marcus kept his expression dull and dazed, the device captured every voice around him. Ethan Calloway appeared outside the bay a few minutes later with Dr. Tyler Voss, a first-year resident barely out of medical school. Tyler was a young white doctor with expensive glasses, a neat haircut, and the nervous posture of a man who still wanted to believe he had entered medicine to save lives, even as fear kept teaching him to obey power instead of principle. Ethan's tone was low, smooth, and poisonous. "Put him down as drug-seeking transient," he said, glancing toward Marcus's curtain. "Chest pain complaint unsupported. Possible stimulant use. Limit escalation unless he crashes in front of somebody important." Tyler hesitated. Marcus heard it in the silence. Then came the weak reply. His EKG looked off. Ethan answered without missing a beat. "Then document poor lead placement and recommend observation only. I'm not filling beds with every street case who walks in wanting narcotics and attention." Marcus lowered his eyes, but inside, something cold settled into place. Whew, this was no accident. This was policy wearing a human face. Naomi Carter entered the records room minutes later to drop off paperwork and stopped when she heard voices through the half-closed door. She recognized Ethan immediately. Instinct made her step back, but one sentence froze her in place. Drug-seeking transient. She stayed still long enough to hear the rest, Ethan telling Tyler exactly how to shape the chart so delay would look justified if anyone ever reviewed it. Naomi's stomach turned. When the hallway cleared, she slipped to a terminal and pulled up the preliminary EKG under Marcus's temporary patient file. She was no cardiologist, but she knew enough to recognize danger, irregular rhythm, ischemic changes, markers no one should have ignored in a man reporting chest pain. Her pulse began to pound. If they kept stalling, this man could code before sunrise. This wasn't neglect anymore. It was a decision. Before Naomi could step away from the screen, another nurse entered the room. Heather Dunn was a senior charge nurse in her 40s, brisk and sharp-faced, the kind of woman who survived long enough in broken systems by learning when not to look too closely. She took one glance at Naomi's expression and knew exactly what she was seeing. "Don't do this," Heather said quietly. "Not for him, not for this." Naomi stared at her. Heather lowered her voice further. "You think Ethan won't bury you? He's been waiting for you to slip. You lose this job, you lose your mother's insurance too. Think about that before you decide to become a hero." The words landed like a threat because they were true. Naomi's mother's treatments depended on the hospital plan. One act of defiance could destroy 3 lives at once. Her phone vibrated again. Malik. Naomi stepped into an empty supply nook and answered fast. This time her younger brother didn't sound angry. He sounded defeated. "The prosecutor said if I plead guilty now, I might get probation," he said. "If I fight it and lose, they'll push for real time." Naomi pressed a hand over her mouth. Malik was 19, scared, and sitting in a cell because a store clerk had pointed at the nearest black boy, and the system had done the rest. "I didn't do it," he whispered. "But they keep acting like the truth doesn't matter." Naomi leaned her head against the shelf behind her, and for one terrible moment, the entire night fused together in her mind. Malik in a holding cell, Marcus in a curtained bay, and powerful people calmly rewriting reality because they could. When she returned to the corridor, Marcus was still alone, still waiting, still being left exactly where Ethan wanted him. But now Naomi knew something Marcus himself may not have fully known yet. The danger was real, immediate, and medical, not just moral. Inside the exam bay, Marcus adjusted the frayed edge of his coat and kept breathing through the pain he had partly staged and partly begun to feel for real. The recorder kept running. Outside, footsteps passed, phones rang, monitors beeped, and hospital staff moved as if this were just another shift. Outside, footsteps passed, phones rang, monitors beeped, and hospital staff moved as if this were just another shift. But in the dark spaces between those ordinary sounds, decisions were being made that could kill a man before morning, and every word of it was being preserved. Naomi Carter stood in the medication room with a clipboard pressed against her chest. forcing her breathing to stay even while panic moved like ice through her veins. Every hallway in St. Avery seemed to have eyes tonight. Cameras hung above the nurses' station, outside the exam bays, near the records room, even over the side corridor leading to the supply closet. Ethan Calloway had built his power on making people feel watched, and Naomi knew better than to speak carelessly inside a building like this. Marcus Reed, though she still did not know his real name, was lying behind a curtain with a dangerous heart rhythm and a falsified chart that could leave him untreated until he collapsed. If she warned him out loud, Ethan could replay the footage before dawn and destroy her, so she did the only thing she could think of. She tore a corner from a prescription pad, found a pen in her scrub pocket, and wrote in tight, slanted letters. "Don't trust their chart. They are leaving you untreated on purpose. Pretend to get weaker." Then she folded the note until it was no larger than a bandage packet and hid it in her palm. As she stared at that tiny square of paper, an older memory rose uninvited, sharp enough to steal the air from her lungs. Naomi was 12 again, sitting in a cracked vinyl chair while her father, Leonard Carter, groaned in the back of a county clinic after a scaffolding collapse at a construction site. Leonard had been a broad-shouldered black man with calloused hands, soft eyes, and the stubborn dignity of someone who worked himself half to death so his family could breathe easier. They had made him wait because his employer's insurance paperwork had not cleared yet. They had told him to be patient. They had called his pain manageable. By the time someone finally took him seriously, the internal bleeding had already done what indifference always did best. Naomi still remembered her mother's scream in that hallway. She remembered promising herself she would never become the kind of medical worker who looked away. And now, here she was, one curtain away from the same crime in a cleaner building. On her way back toward Marcus's Bay, Naomi nearly collided with Mrs. Bernice Holloway in the service corridor. The older janitor slowed her mop and gave Naomi one long look that said she already knew trouble was moving through the building. Mrs. Bernice had spent 26 years cleaning the places where important people made ugly decisions, and her quiet had teeth. "You need to be careful with that man in room 4, she murmured without moving her lips much. Naomi stiffened. "You know something?" Mrs. Bernice nodded once. "I seen Ethan do strange things on sensitive nights. Saw him come out of the security office twice after midnight, and next thing I know, hallway footage goes missing. Said the system glitched. Funny how it only glitches when certain patients get mistreated." Naomi's fingers closed tighter around the folded note. That meant Ethan was not just cruel, he was practiced. He had done this before and cleaned up after himself. The system protecting him ran deeper than bad manners and prejudice. It had routines. Naomi entered Marcus's Bay carrying a fresh blanket and a clipboard to make the visit look ordinary. Marcus lay half reclined, one hand near his chest, face drawn with a mixture of exhaustion and restraint. Up close, his eyes were the only part of him that did not fit the role. Steady, watchful, too intelligent to belong to a man the staff had already decided not to save. Naomi kept her face blank. "I'm just adjusting your sheet," she said in a neutral tone for the benefit of anyone listening nearby. As she leaned in, she slid the folded note beneath his right hand, tucking it into the crease of the bedding with practiced precision. Her fingers brushed his for less than a second. He did not react. She pulled the blanket smooth, checked the monitor lead as if she were doing routine care, and walked away without once looking back. Only when she reached the curtain line did she hear the faint rustle of paper. At the nurse's station, her phone buzzed with a text. Malik. Naomi ducked her head and read it fast. "The only witness who said I wasn't the one at the store is gone. Public defender says they can't find him now." Her stomach dropped. Of course he was gone. In places like this, truth did not vanish by accident. It was erased, intimidated, or priced out of reach. She looked across the room toward Marcus's Bay and felt the same pattern locking into place again. A black man in danger, a paper trail being manipulated, people in power trusting that fear would do the rest. Naomi slipped the phone back into her pocket and forced her hands not to shake. Behind the curtain, Marcus waited until footsteps faded before opening his hand. He unfolded the note and read every word twice. Then his gaze lifted toward the ceiling camera, toward the corridor, toward the hidden machinery of the place. So there was still one conscience left inside St. Avery. Someone had seen the truth and chosen risk over silence. Marcus let the paper disappear into the mattress seam and adjusted his breathing, making it shallower, rougher, weaker. If they wanted a dying man they could dismiss, he would give them one. Not because he had surrendered, but because a rotten system always revealed itself fastest when it believed its victim had no power at all. And in the hush of the exam bay, with the note still burning in his mind, Marcus made a silent decision. He would stay in character and let the hospital show him just how far its cruelty was willing to go. Mrs. Bernice had spent 26 years cleaning the places where important people made ugly decisions, and her quiet had teeth. "You need to be careful with that man in room 4, she murmured without moving her lips much. Naomi stiffened. "You know something?" Mrs. Bernice nodded once. "I seen Ethan do strange things on sensitive nights. Saw him come out of the security office twice after midnight, and next thing I know, hallway footage goes missing. Said the system glitched. Funny how it only glitches when certain patients get mistreated." Naomi's fingers closed tighter around the folded note. That meant Ethan was not just cruel, he was practiced. He had done this before and cleaned up after himself. The system protecting him ran deeper than bad manners and prejudice. It had routines. Naomi entered Marcus's bay carrying a fresh blanket and a clipboard to make the visit look ordinary. Marcus lay half reclined, one hand near his chest, face drawn with a mixture of exhaustion and restraint. Up close, his eyes were the only part of him that did not fit the role. Steady, watchful, too intelligent to belong to a man the staff had already decided not to save. Naomi kept her face blank. "I'm just adjusting your sheet," she said in a neutral tone for the benefit of anyone listening nearby. As she leaned in, she slid the folded note beneath his right hand, tucking it into the crease of the bedding with practiced precision. Her fingers brushed his for less than a second. He did not react. She pulled the blanket smooth, checked the monitor lead as if she were doing routine care, and walked away without once looking back. Only when she reached the curtain line did she hear the faint rustle of paper. At the nurse's station, her phone buzzed with a text. "Malik." Naomi ducked her head and read it fast. "The only witness who said I wasn't the one at the store is gone. Public defender says they can't find him now." Her stomach dropped. Of course he was gone. In places like this, truth did not vanish by accident. It was erased, intimidated, or priced out of reach. She looked across the room toward Marcus's bay and felt the same pattern locking into place again. A black man in danger, a paper trail being manipulated, people in power trusting that fear would do the rest. Naomi slipped the phone back into her pocket and forced her hands not to shake. Ethan Calloway stood at the nurse's station with his hands folded neatly in front of him. But behind the polished stillness of his posture, suspicion had already taken root. The man in room 4 was wrong. Not medically wrong, socially wrong. He did not beg, did not ramble, did not lash out, did not shrink the way Ethan expected men like him to shrink. Even weakened, he carried himself with too much control. Ethan had spent years managing people by instinct, sorting them into categories that determined how much dignity they would be allowed. Marcus did not fit the category Ethan had assigned him, and that alone made him dangerous. So Ethan made a decision. If the patient would not collapse on cue, he would be moved somewhere quieter, somewhere cheaper, somewhere invisible. Within minutes, Ethan instructed transport to prepare Marcus for transfer to the overflow holding annex on the backside of the hospital, a stripped-down waiting zone used for underinsured patients, psych holds, and people the system preferred to forget. If Marcus worsened there, no donors would see it, no important families would complain, and no one in the main ER would be inconvenienced. The orderly assigned to the move was Luis Mendoza, a soft-spoken man in his late 20s with tired shoulders and the watchful silence of someone supporting too many relatives on one paycheck. He rolled Marcus's chair down a dim service corridor far from the polished front-facing wings of St. Avery. The annex smelled faintly of bleach, stale coffee, and old fear. Its walls were scuffed, its lights uneven, its television mounted too high for anyone to watch comfortably. A woman slept under a paper blanket in one corner. An elderly man coughed into a towel no one had replaced. Here, time did not move forward. It just collected. Marcus kept his performance intact, breathing shallowly, letting his body sag just enough to appear weaker. But internally, his focus sharpened. This relocation was not about medicine. It was about disappearance. And in the hidden pocket of his coat, the recorder captured every order, every muttered complaint, every name. Naomi Carter felt the shift in the building the moment Marcus disappeared from the main ER board. Ethan had scrubbed his presence from the center of attention too quickly, too efficiently. Pretending to reconcile overnight reports, she slipped into an administrative terminal she was not supposed to use, and followed a trail she had noticed before but never had the nerve to pursue. St. Avery's Charitable Assistance Fund, publicly praised in annual newsletters as a lifeline for low-income families and black patients from underserved neighborhoods, had dozens of claims marked approved on paper but never fully paid out. The numbers didn't line up. Grant amounts had been altered, approvals reversed, and patient balances quietly pushed back onto families who should have been covered. Then Naomi saw the pattern that made her blood run cold. Several adjusted records carried a digital authorization stamp tied to Ethan's credentials. She opened one more file, then another. The same signature, the same redirection of money. This was not random theft. It was a system feeding on the people it claimed to save. Before Naomi could dig further, her phone buzzed with a secure message from Malik. He had borrowed another detainee's contraband phone for 60 seconds and typed fast. "The store owner who accused me? His brother sits on the board of a foundation that donates to St. Avery. I heard the prosecutor mention the name. Same people. I'm telling you, Naomi, this is connected." Naomi read the message twice. Her exhaustion vanished, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. She pulled up donor records from a public-facing database and cross-referenced one of the names Malik sent. There it was, Preston Hale, regional franchise owner, campaign donor, civic sponsor, and one of the hospital's most celebrated private benefactors. Suddenly, the lines between her brother's case and Marcus's mistreatment were no longer abstract. The same circle of money, influence, and image management that protected men like Ethan also shielded accusations, erased witnesses, and decided which black lives could be discredited cheaply. Mrs. Bernice found Naomi in the records alcove, staring at the screen like someone who had finally seen the machinery behind the wall. The older woman set down her mop and glanced once at the data. "You finally found it," she said quietly. Naomi turned to her. "How long has this been happening?" Mrs. Bernice gave a sad, humorless laugh. "Long enough for good people to stop asking." Then, after a pause, "This place knows how to smile in public and steal in private. Same way this city does." Naomi looked back at the altered assistance files, the false approvals, the names of families who had probably gone into debt while executives posed for charity galas. For the first time that night, she understood that what was happening to Marcus was bigger than one racist manager abusing power during one shift. St. Avery had built a double system, one for the people who arrived with status, and one for the people who arrived with the wrong skin, the wrong clothes, or the wrong zip code. In the annex, Marcus lifted his head slightly as an ambulance siren wailed somewhere beyond the loading dock. He could feel the night tightening around him, but he could also feel the shape of the truth changing. This was no longer just about how one black man was treated when stripped of visible power. It was about an institution using race, poverty, and bureaucracy as cover for something older and uglier. Profit dressed as procedure. He thought of the note beneath the sheet, of the nurse who had risked herself to warn him, and of the voices his recorder had already captured. Somewhere above him, someone was rewriting charts and balancing theft against optics. Somewhere else in the city, another young black man, someone's brother, someone's son, was being cornered into guilt because powerful people knew the system would help them. Marcus closed his eyes for one measured breath, then opened them again. The trap Ethan thought he was closing had become something else entirely. It was now a map. By 2:30 in the morning, the holding annex had grown quieter in the most dangerous way possible. The coughing had faded. The overhead television muttered to itself. Rain tapped softly against the narrow back windows near the loading dock. Marcus Reed sat slumped in the transport chair where they had left him, one hand still near his chest, his breathing measured and controlled, until suddenly it wasn't. A sharp pain tore across his sternum, deeper and hotter than anything he had staged before. His fingers tightened against the thin hospital blanket. The old condition he had kept under control for years, the one brought on by stress and made worse by exhaustion, was no longer playing along with the plan. His pulse began to hammer unevenly, For the first time that night, Marcus was not acting. He was in real danger, and the room around him was too neglected, too slow, too indifferent to notice in time. Naomi Carter saw the change the moment she stepped into the annex doorway. She had come looking for him after tracing his transfer order, and one glance was enough to strip away every remaining excuse. Marcus's skin had turned ashy beneath the dirt and shadow. Sweat gleamed across his forehead. His breathing was tight, shallow, wrong. This was no longer about documentation or suspicion or quietly gathering proof. If she did nothing now, he could die exactly the way the system had intended. Out of sight, under-registered, and explained away by a corrupted chart. Naomi froze for one terrible second, and in that second she saw everything she stood to lose. Her salary, her health insurance, her mother's treatment, Malik's legal defense, the fragile roof over her family's head. Then she saw her father dying in a hallway again. She saw the note she had hidden under the sheet, and she made her choice. "Get me a gurney now," she shouted, louder than she had spoken all night. "This patient is crashing." The first person to answer was Daniel Brooks. Daniel was a young, white physician in his early 30s, still new enough to medicine to recognize injustice, but not yet brave enough to confront it without trembling. He had spent most of the night obeying the culture around him, watching, rationalizing, staying quiet. But when he saw Marcus try and fail to draw a full breath, something inside him cracked. Daniel rushed forward, eyes wide, and reached for the portable monitor. "His rhythm's unstable," he said, voice tightening. "He needs cardiac intervention now." Naomi was already moving, unlocking the gurney with practiced hands and guiding Marcus onto it with Luis's help. "Then stop standing there and help me," she snapped. They pushed fast toward the main corridor, wheels rattling over the uneven floor as monitors began to scream. Behind them, staff looked up in confusion, startled less by the emergency than by Naomi's refusal to keep it quiet. They were halfway to the cardiac suite when Ethan Calloway stepped into the hallway like a man who believed the building belonged to him. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. Naomi didn't slow down. "Saving a patient you were willing to let die." Ethan moved toward the gurney, face flushed with fury. "He is not cleared for transfer. Return him to the annex." Naomi turned, one hand still gripping the rail. "His chart was falsified. His EKG was dangerous. He needs treatment now." For a split second, the hallway went still. Nurses stared. Techs froze. Kelsey at the front desk looked like she had forgotten how to blink. Then Ethan's voice hardened into a public threat. "If you move him one more foot against protocol, you are finished in this city." Naomi met his stare without flinching. "Then I'll be finished after he's alive," and she shoved the gurney forward. Security rounded the corner before they reached the double doors, but Mrs. Bernice Holloway got there first. The older janitor planted her mop cart sideways across the hall with surprising force, blocking the narrow passage so completely that the guards had to stop short. "Ain't no brave men needed to wrestle a nurse tonight," she said, chin lifted, voice rough and unshaking. One guard told her to move. She didn't. "Then move me yourself," she replied, loud enough for half the unit to hear. The delay lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Daniel hit the access code to the cardiac treatment room, and Naomi pushed Marcus through the doors, while alarms echoed against tile and glass. Ethan was still shouting when the doors sealed behind them. For the first time that night, his authority had not been enough. Inside the room, the pace changed from suppression to action. Pads were placed. IV lines were hung. Daniel called for medication with a steadier voice than he felt. Naomi worked beside him with fierce concentration, every movement sharp with anger and purpose. Marcus drifted in and out, pain blurring the edges of the room. But he was conscious long enough to see Naomi refusing to break under pressure, and Daniel finally choosing truth over fear. Outside, Ethan's fury only deepened. When Marcus stabilized enough for the immediate danger to pass, Ethan was waiting. In front of the staff, in front of the station, in front of the same institution that had profited from silence. He pointed at Naomi and said, "You are suspended effective immediately. Hand over your badge. And hear me clearly, you will never work in another hospital in this state again." Naomi's hand trembled, but only once. Then she unclipped her badge, set it on the counter, and lifted her chin. At nearly the same moment, miles away in a cramped holding cell, Malik Carter received the first piece of hope he had heard in days. A local pastor named Reverend Isaiah Cole, a broad-shouldered black minister in his 60s known for visiting jails, hospital wards, and neighborhoods the city preferred not to remember, had heard about Malik through a church volunteer and made a call on his behalf. By dawn, a civil rights attorney had agreed to review the case. Malik held the borrowed phone with both hands, stunned into silence. Back at St. Avery, Naomi stood badgeless in a hallway full of witnesses, uncertain what she had just destroyed and what she had just saved. But one thing had changed forever. The people Ethan counted on to stay afraid had started moving. And once that happened, silence no longer belonged to him. Ethan Calloway stood at the central nurses' station with Naomi's badge in his hand like a trophy, already shaping the story he intended to sell. His voice carried just enough to reach the nearest staff and administrators gathering at the edge of the corridor. Naomi had violated protocol. Naomi had endangered a patient. Naomi had acted emotionally and recklessly. He spoke with the smooth certainty of a man who had survived every scandal by getting ahead of the truth and burying it under polished lies. Naomi stood 3 feet away, pale with exhaustion but still upright, while Daniel Brooks hovered near the cardiac room door, knowing that if he stayed silent now, he would be helping Ethan finish what the hospital had started. Then the door behind them opened, and Marcus Reed sat up on the treatment bed with the slow, deliberate control of a man who had no intention of dying quietly, or letting anyone else be sacrificed for him. The hallway fell silent as Marcus pulled the leads from his chest one by one and swung his legs over the side of the bed. The dirt on his face was still there, the coat still hung from his shoulders, but something in the room changed the moment he stood. The false image of weakness disappeared. In its place was a presence so commanding that even Ethan took half a step back before catching himself. "That will be enough," Marcus said, his voice calm but edged with steel. He looked first at Naomi, then at Ethan, then at the cluster of witnesses gathering beyond them. "My name is Marcus Reed." Heads turned. Someone in the back gasped. Outside the glass doors at the far end of the corridor, movement surged. Tailored suits, cameras, uniformed officers, and hospital board members hurrying in under the escort of a woman in a navy coat and heels, moving like she owned every second of the moment. Vanessa Cole, Marcus's chief of staff, had arrived exactly when she intended to. Vanessa entered flanked by 2 attorneys, 3 police officers, and a local investigative reporter with a camera already raised. Behind them came members of St. Avery's board, their faces drained of color as they realized they had not been summoned to a contained personnel dispute, but to a live detonation. Marcus took the recorder from inside his coat and handed it to one of the attorneys. "Everything said to me tonight was preserved," he said. "Every altered instruction, every delay, every lie." Vanessa lifted a tablet and sent files to the screens in the administrative bay. The anonymous video, the audio of Ethan instructing Tyler Voss to classify Marcus as a drug-seeking transient, the transfer order to the annex, the falsified treatment trail, and the altered charitable fund records Naomi had uncovered. What had been rumor a moment earlier became evidence in less than 30 seconds. The fluorescent-lit corridor turned into a courtroom without warning. Daniel Brooks stepped forward before fear could drag him backward again. His voice shook on the first sentence, then steadied with each word. He confirmed Ethan's instruction to alter the chart. He confirmed the dangerous EKG findings. He confirmed that Marcus should never have been sent to the annex in the first place. Naomi looked at him in stunned silence, and for the first time all night, Daniel did not look away. One of Marcus's lawyers then opened a second file, one Naomi had not seen before. It linked St. Avery's contracted security company to off-the-books cooperation with a private legal fixer who had helped shape witness statements in low-income criminal cases, including Malik Carter's. The reporter's head snapped up. Another lawyer added the final blow. The missing witness in Malik's case had been found that evening. He was a former St. Avery security employee named Curtis Lane, forced out after refusing to back a false incident report tied to one of the same donor-connected businesses now appearing in Malik's case file. Marcus had found him, protected him, and brought his sworn statement. Ethan's face changed by degrees, first disbelief, then panic, then the frantic calculation of a man looking for any exit at all. "This is insane," he snapped. "You can't just walk in here and fabricate a conspiracy because one unstable nurse—" Marcus cut him off with a single look. "Careful," he said softly. "You've mistaken the room." Then he turned to the board members. "My investment firm is finalizing a purchase of the largest distressed debt position tied to the St. Avery Hospital system. By the time markets open, one signature will determine whether this board remains symbolic or irrelevant." The words landed harder than the evidence had. This was not merely public shame, it was annihilation of power. If the debt changed hands, the board's leverage collapsed, their internal protection networks weakened, and every executive who had hidden behind structure would be exposed without shelter. Marcus had not only caught the rot, he had arrived holding the knife to remove it. Ethan ran. He did not do it dramatically. He did it the way cowards always did, suddenly, sideways, hoping panic could outrun accountability. He turned and pushed through the main corridor toward the front lobby, nearly colliding with a volunteer cart before breaking into a clumsy sprint. But the police officers Vanessa had brought were already moving. Two intercepted him beneath the hospital's front atrium before he reached the revolving doors. Patients in the waiting area stood up as Ethan was pinned, handcuffed, and read his rights under the glow of the donor recognition wall. His struggle lasted less than a minute. His power lasted even less. Back upstairs, Naomi stood in the center of the wreckage he had spent years avoiding, while reporters captured every face and every silence. Chapter by chapter, lie by lie, the system had built itself around the assumption that people like her would remain disposable. But tonight, in one brutal turn, the disposable had become witnesses, and the untouchable had finally been touched. By sunrise, Ethan Calloway was no longer the man who controlled St. Avery with a smile and a signature. He was led out of the hospital in handcuffs beneath the same polished donor wall that had once protected him, charged with falsifying medical records, racial discrimination, embezzlement of charitable funds, and reckless endangerment of a patient's life. The image hit every local station before noon. But Ethan was only the first crack. By the end of the week, board members who had ignored warnings, executives who had signed off on manipulated reports, and administrators who had hidden behind policy were fired in a public sweep that stunned the city. For years, they had treated black pain like paperwork and poor families like numbers. Now their names were the ones being read aloud in disgrace. The next public shock came 3 days later, when Malik Carter walked out of court a free man. Reverend Isaiah stood beside him, so did Naomi. And when Curtis Lane, the former security guard Marcus had located, gave his sworn statement, the entire case against Malik collapsed in full view of reporters and legal observers. The convenience store that had framed him was placed under criminal investigation after financial records linked its owners to the same donor network that had been shielding corruption at St. Avery. Prosecutors who had tried to rush Malik into a plea deal suddenly went silent under media pressure. Malik did not just get his freedom back, he got his name back. For the first time in weeks, Naomi saw her younger brother stand straight without fear in his eyes. It felt like watching someone breathe after being held underwater. Marcus Reed moved faster than anyone expected. He did not save St. Avery by protecting its image. He saved it by destroying the version of it that deserved to die. Within a month, the hospital was placed under emergency restructuring. The charitable fund was rebuilt with transparent oversight. The security contract was terminated. Bias review protocols became mandatory. Patient intake rules were rewritten so no one could be deprioritized based on appearance, income, or insurance ambiguity. Community advocates were brought onto the Oversight Council, and when Marcus announced the new mission publicly, he did not speak like a billionaire preserving an asset. He spoke like a black son who still remembered losing his mother because a system had decided her suffering could wait. A hospital that protects reputation before human life, he told the cameras, is not a place of healing. It is a place of violence. When Marcus asked Naomi Carter to meet him in the newly stripped executive conference room, she expected gratitude, maybe a severance package, maybe a quiet recommendation letter to help rebuild what Ethan had tried to destroy. Instead, Marcus placed a folder in front of her. Inside was a formal offer naming her Director of Equitable Patient Care Operations. Naomi read the title twice. Marcus watched her with the same calm certainty he had carried the night everything broke open. "You saw the truth before anyone else wanted it seen," he said. You acted when silence would have been safer. This hospital doesn't need polished people, it needs brave ones." Naomi looked up, stunned. The salary would protect her mother's treatment. The benefits would secure her family. The authority would let her change the very machine that had once threatened to grind her down. "I don't want a title if nothing really changes," she said. Marcus nodded once. "Then make sure it does." 3 months later, St. Avery reopened, but it no longer felt like the same building. The walls had been repainted in warm earth tones instead of sterile gloss. Community health workers stood beside front desk staff. Intake questions had changed. Security officers had been retrained or removed. Daniel Brooks, now the head of emergency medicine, stayed because he refused to let his worst night remain the truest thing about him. He trained every incoming resident himself on the cost of hesitation, the danger of bias, and the difference between procedure and justice. Mrs. Bernice Holloway was honored at the reopening ceremony as the first honorary staff member of the new St. Avery, and when her name was called, the applause lasted long enough to make her wipe her eyes with the back of her hand and grumble that people were making a fuss for nothing. But everyone in that lobby knew better. She had stood in the doorway when courage needed a witness. On the wall near the reception desk hung a small glass frame containing a folded, time-worn note. Beneath it, in clean black lettering, were the words, "Dignity delayed is dignity denied." Naomi had insisted it be placed where every employee, every executive, every visitor, and every patient would see it. On the morning the hospital reopened, the first man through the doors was a black homeless man in a worn coat, his beard untrimmed, his eyes wary with the kind of caution born from being rejected too many times. The front desk staff glanced up. Naomi stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Good morning, sir," she said warmly. "Come with me. We're going to take care of you." No one blocked his path. No one called security. No one looked away. And as Marcus watched from across the lobby, he understood that this was the victory Ethan and the old board would never have understood. Not just that the guilty had fallen, but that the door they once guarded with cruelty now opened with dignity instead. And as I stood there watching those doors stay open for a man who once would have been thrown away, I realized something I will never forget. Racism does not always shout. Sometimes it hides behind policies, uniforms, titles, and polite voices. Sometimes it looks like delay, silence, or the decision that one life matters less than another. But no matter how powerful people think they are, God sees what they do in the dark. God sees every insult, every injustice, every moment someone is judged by skin color instead of soul. What happened that night was bigger than one hospital, one manager, or one lie. It was about what kind of world we are willing to accept. Will we stay silent when people are humiliated, ignored, or treated as less because of their race? Or will we stand up, even when it costs something? Because real change begins the moment one person decides that fear will not speak louder than truth. So now I want to ask you, have you ever seen racism or unfair treatment happen right in front of you? What would you have done if you were Naomi? And do you believe justice still exists in a world like this? Share your thoughts in the comments because I truly want to hear your voice. If this story touched you, moved you, or made you think, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories. There are many more incredible stories waiting for you here.